Did you know that there was a second Roswell-type incident in my lifetime?
Did you know that there have been major UFO sightings, wreckage, bodies, and even a death, but on Brazilian soil?
Did you know that Siberia had a major situation where almost an entire battalion of soldiers were killed by extraterrestrial life? Well, extraterrestrial.
And did you know that governments or top secret agencies within the governments around the world have been working together to manage what we know about this phenomenon?
We are going to dig into where our space technology really came from and how it has been reverse engineered for decades.
And time machines. Are they just the imagination of Hollywood or closer to fact than we even realize?
And if we have time today, we're going to look at major current events, headlines, and remarks from even the top elite and the president himself, who have admitted to these things, and also teleportation.
We're going to have to break this into two. I already know that. But these episodes are ones you are not going to want to miss. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scharrenberg. Thank you so much for joining us on Live Life in the Spirit.
If you've watched our previous episodes about the alien phenomena and traveled through time and space, has your perspective on this topic changed at all?
And if you haven't watched it, we encourage you to go back and do so. It will only add to what we're diving into today.
Well, in 1978, UFO scientists interviewed Jesse Marcel, the first military officer deployed to debris field at Roswell. So this is kind of backing up. This is what we talked about in Roswell, but there's a reason why we are linking these two. Their interest led to the discovery of a second location in a crash that happened the same week as the Roswell incident. We had mentioned this also.
Barney Barnett was a local soil conservation specialist, and he was out in the plains of San Augustine that week. It's about 250 miles from Roswell, and he says he found a crashed saucer and a debris field there in those plains.
And it is on the same line.
Yes.
According to Barnett, he had been there about 30 to 45 minutes when a group of archaeologists came up on the area. There was an archaeologist working in the area, Herbert W. Dick, so it is possible they stumbled upon it when leaving their dig site.
So Art Campbell was a man who heard about Barney Barnett's story. He did some aerial exploration and discovered what appeared to be a path where the saucer might have crashed. The soil was tested in that area and it came back different than the soil around it. So he started digging, and he actually found pieces that were identical to the fragments at Roswell, with that sort of metal that you could crumple, and then it would
thin and memory.
Mm-hmm, it would go back to its original shape.
Well, we didn't hear or see much else about this incident until we watched an interview with Philip Corso, a retired high-ranking member of the U.S. military and government, who also mentioned the San Augustine incident. So we talked about this on that one episode. I think it was the last episode.
We just touched on it, but we didn't have this information.
No, we didn't, and this just validated all that. So there was the saucer, the hit. I mean, the U.S. government was out there, cleaned it up so fast, and that saucer was way more intact than the ones in Roswell.
But it's interesting what happened next.
Well, we're going to talk more about what else this gentleman had to say a little later. But he claimed there had been another disc-like flying machine, more debris, and more non-human bodies.
But the part that's interesting is the saucer, the bodies, everything that they had disappeared. Now, what he said was that the policy at that time was that this kind of stuff didn't happen and didn't exist, so they didn't report it or investigate it, because you can't report something missing that never existed in the first place. So it just kind of...
And that was their go-to on everything. It didn't happen. Roswell Didn't happen. Ships, UFOs, didn't happen. Right. So there was nothing that they could do. And that was the government stance. And he said they were really good at that. It was just easier to say, never happened. So case closed. Well, there's much about all of this that is strange and unsettling, you have to admit. Which brings us to another very bizarre story that is not that old. And yet none of us have heard about this at all. And it's in Varginha, Brazil.
In January of 1996, NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command, warned Brazil that there was a significant amount of UFO activity in the area.
Well, the next day, the media around the world was full of reports of a UFO crash, including talk of creatures, some which had survived the crash.
The details that have come to light to date are that there were 2 creatures that survived the crash. They were captured and taken to a hospital in the city, and then later taken out.
And there were actually more than just those 2, but the 2 for sure that survived.
Right.
Well, Brazil has been a hot spot of UFO activity, including the cattle mutilations for decades. And we kind of talked about that. We didn't have a map to put up, but the one we had seen, it was just amazing. South America, the whole top part of it, and then down all through Brazil was just full of cattle mutilations.
The first major incident on record was in Ubatuba in 1957. So a UFO was seen exploding before it hit the water.
And in 1958 in Trinidad, the Brazilian Navy took photos of UFOs over the water. In 1968 in Luna, a woman saw and reported a flying disc.
In 1977 in Colares, there were multiple sightings of crafts in the air. In May of 1986 in Sao Paulo, fighter jets chased several UFOs, and they reported that those UFOs kind of maneuvered in ways that the jets could not.
In Rio de Janeiro in 1995, a UFO was spotted during the day.
In Duque de Caxias in 1996, a disc-like UFO was seen at night.
And then in 1998, a small light moved among houses, and none of them compared to the Varginha incident in 1996.
It's true.
So there have been a lot of little sightings. I think the only reason why we bring these up is because we hear about the ones in America, North America, and we don't realize that they are all over the world, and South America is very prevalent. But it seemed like Brazil,
in particular,
had the biggest activity.
The mayor of Varginha confirmed that this incident did in fact happen, in spite of how quiet they have tried to keep it.
Well, they say that, but then when you drive into town, they've got this great big spaceship on top of a pole. That's their motto for the town.
The details, though, they have kept quiet.
Yeah. One couple heard a disturbance in their cattle. They were actually out in the country. And so it was the cows who were making the noise. Now, they didn't say anything about losing a cow, which that's interesting. So they looked outside and they saw this looked like a submarine-like thing going slowly to the ground. So when we get into these other guys that see this and talk about it, they all talk about the cigar-shaped minibus, school bus, submarine type. There seems to be the couple different, and we've seen videos of that and pictures where they don't all look like flying saucers. No. Some of them are this long.
The little tic-tac-like thing on the radar would have been more of a bus, Carlos de Souza saw the same craft while driving down the road and decided to kind of follow it. He said the side was torn open and white smoke was coming out of it, which was interesting because normally white smoke right at the origin is not the color that would come out of fire.
After listening to him talk, he kept talking about the horrible stench, and he said it reeked so bad of ammonia, and I wonder if that had something to do with that white smoke.
Could have been like a chemical reaction or something. Oh, for sure.
Because it was slowly descending down, and at one point did a complete 360-degree turn as it got close to the ground, and the engine seemed to fail, and that's when it crashed. He got out and examined it more and said it was about the size of a school bus.
And that smell of ammonia was so bad that it was burning his eyes, and he said he was using his shirt to kind of breathe through because it was not just a faint.
Well, when he was going down this road, it's like a back road, and dirt road, and it's not like what we have. It's like the sides were like, the side of the hill is like 4 or 5 feet tall,
Right.
when you're in a car. And as he came up on a hill, he remembered, it's been 20 years, he remembered where it was at. He knew it was on this side of the hill and that there was a pasture around on this side. And just to the farther down, there was a little white house. He remembered that distinctly. And so when he went back trying to find this place,
which he had not been there, it'd been 26 years.
They got close, and he got out, and they tried to make it be like that was the site, and he's like, it just didn't feel right.
Right.
And well, maybe the house was gone, but nothing, the pasture wasn't there, it just did not feel right. And then they found on Google Maps that there was a little white house just a little bit more up the road. So they got in and went a little farther, and when they came to the hill and he got out, he knew exactly. He ran to the spot, and I mean, it's been 25 years, and I don't know the terrain of that place, but to look at it, it almost looks like you could see where a ship would have like grooved in the ground. There's now hence a tree that's grown up, and that's why he didn't see the house just, from where he was standing this time as opposed to 25 years ago. But it was right there.
It was. And he was so emotional. I mean,
he was.
And there had been nothing before when they weren't at the right spot. It was like all of the things came back that kind of happened, I think, since then.
Well, according to D'Souza, it was a very short time after he arrived that the military arrived on the scene, and they told him to get away. And he did not leave at first, but then they were so adamant. I mean, they were holding the gun right in his face and said, leave, go, get out, get out, get out. And so he did.
And he said he did one interview after the crash, and then he disappeared for almost 26 years. He wasn't seen around the area. And he came back when they were doing this. They found him when they were doing this documentary, and he said that men in black suits had found him at a coffee shop after the incident and told him to leave and never say anything to anyone, and that he saw nothing.
And they made it so apparent that something horrible would happen to him if he did not comply. Well, 7 days after the crash, a military blockade was set up in town. And there were multiple witnesses who actually came forward, and they reported encountering this blockade and were unable to go home or where they needed to go. And it was interesting that the one guy said, I live in a free country. I can go where I want. And they said, no, you can't.
Right.
And again, we're very stern with him because they tried several times to go and would not let him go past this blockade. You have to realize, again, we are talking, this is 1996, 97. This is not 1947. This
is not like what Roswell was. Things are a lot different.
And so these people are still alive, and there were a lot of eyewitnesses, and a lot of people knew what was going on, but they hadn't been able to talk about it for a very long time. And some were very eager to tell their story, but for the most part, a lot of people wanted to be off camera. They didn't want their faces shown. They didn't even want to talk about it. Like, it took some real coercing and some special cinematic maneuvering to even get some of them to talk. And then there were many others that were key vital people in this story that just flat out refused.
Yeah. So there was one well-respected family who didn't want their names released. They didn't want to have their faces on camera, but they said that they saw some sort of flying disc that night with a red light coming from it. Like it was looking for something, like it was scanning. It was going really slow back and forth over their neighborhood. She said they watched it for 15 or 20 minutes. They did,
Well, and we kind of know what they were.
We know what they were looking for now, yes.
And that later night, someone from NASA, along with ufologists named Abaraja and some civilian Americans dressed in black suits, showed up. And after hearing about their report, they said the conversation never happened and they were never there. We have the movie Men in Black and stuff, but it's like...
Obviously, they didn't have the little flashy thing that they needed.
But Hollywood doesn't come up with a lot of that stuff, I don't think, on their own. They just take what they know and take it to the next level, maybe and maybe not.
It's interesting, though.
Well, why did they show up to these people's house? Because of everything that was going on. Why was there a barricade? Because there was reports that there were a couple creatures still alive. One was spotted, actually, so the houses, they're all kind of concrete. And this particular spot was just like an empty grassy area that you'd walk through, and these two girls and their aunt were going to a gym that was around the corner. And as they're walking through here is where they just happened to glance over. They thought it was a shadow or something, and they see this creature against the wall hunched over.
Yeah, kind of hunched over. They said it was really small. So they said it was very small and black this time, which was interesting. We hadn't heard that in other reports.
What was the other big thing that was different?
It was shiny. They said it was almost like, well, one of the reports said it was like almost like a silicone, and it was oily looking, and it had red eyes, large red eyes, which that was different. And the eyes, they were unsettling.
Well, the girls, they kept saying it was demonic. It was demonic. It was demonic. They were also from the Catholic Church, so they knew about demons. I mean, it wasn't like that was an unheard
of thing for them. And they said it did look injured. One of them kind of approached and got a little bit closer. I mean, they said maybe 8 feet away or something. And then they were scared. And so they took off and went home.
But then the mother came back with the aunt and she was talking about that area. So this thing had left. And it reeked so bad. The aunt said ammonia. And the mom was going, no, it was sulfur.
Which is interesting.
But she said she got the smell in her nose so bad, she went home and tried to rinse it out with water and alcohol for 4 days.
Yeah,
it was so strong, she couldn't even stand it.
Yeah, that is some significant, So, interestingly enough, this family also was later visited by men in black suits. Now, they handled them a little bit differently. They were offered a large sum of money that could be spent anywhere but Brazil, is the way they worded it, if they would agree to take the girls, leave the country, and never speak of the incident again.
Well, the reason why they showed up was because the news reports came to the girls right away, and they were getting their testimonies, and they were getting the story and all this stuff, and they were thrust into the limelight immediately, and they were wanting to squelch it. But what did the mom say?
She said they didn't take the deal. They wanted them to not have to deny experiencing something like that.
Because they would forever be known then as a fraud or, liar or something like that. And she was more worried about their reputation than they were about any money.
Right. So the reports had said that at least 2 creatures were captured alive. So one of them, firemen caught with a net and was able to bring him in, and they took him to the hospital. But this other one, in the location not far from where the girls spotted that creature, there were some military police officers or intelligence officers who were brought there. And there was the driver and then this officer named Marco Cherisi. And Marco saw the thing, went and tackled it. So he, wrapped his arms around it, got it into whatever they carried it in, and then got that to the hospital. So he had significant close contact with this thing. Now, they said that the smell, even on him for weeks, I mean... It was terrible. It wouldn't leave. And there was still residue.
It was sticky residue.
Yeah.
That just...
I think that's probably where that oily came from, is the,
Okay, we're going to get into this a little more. We talked about this last time. About the whole thing with the cattle mutilation. Why would these things be needing the blood and all this stuff? And we talked about possible skin suits. Because if they're disembodied spirits needing a skin suit.
Right, because they can't interact with the physical world.
So their first time maybe doing this was more of a plastic, silicone... Think about it. If you've ever had anything that has a silicone handle, last thing you get it in the sun, and that's the thing. In Brazil, it was super hot. They kept saying it was so hot, and they looked like they were so hot. Well, it probably looked like that if they were getting shiny and kind of melting a little.
Sure.
Their skin suit. Well, you grab something like that, it gets sticky.
Right, it does.
You can't get it off. I mean, we have to use turpentine or
some sort of
major.
Yeah.
The problem was, though, by having this contact with this creature, we don't know what happened to that creature. Right, when they first got there. And that is completely quiet.
Right.
Lips sealed, nobody's talking, but they will talk about this young man who came in, and then he went home. Well, it almost may sound like it was immediate, but it wasn't. He went home, and almost a month went by.
Right.
And he kept getting sicker and sicker, and he would come in, and they said, well, he had an infection. And his body, it was unlike any known antigen that they'd ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, they were fighting it with antibiotics, and because he came in and he wasn't feeling well, but he didn't, I mean, he told his sister, he's like, I don't understand, because they admitted him and put him in the ICU. And he was well enough to tell his sister, I don't understand why I'm here, like, find out what's going on. And
that was like at 9 o'clock in the morning. So he went in sometime in around 9, and by noon he was dead.
Right. And there was not a lot of explanation offered to the family. And the sister, to this day, is still striving for answers because she feels like they were lied to or something happened.
Well, even his own wife, she tried to get the paperwork, his charts, and it took forever to get it. Then they wanted a lot of money for it. And when she finally got it, it was missing a whole bunch of pages.
Yeah.
So whatever this disease was, this bacteria, this virus that he contracted,
it was not anything that we know of.
It was not of this earth that we could combat or fight. And he was a very, very young man. I'd say he was
in his 20s, I think. Yeah, early 20s, 21 or something. Yeah.
Marco Schulz is the only one that we know of that's recorded that has actually died by contact.
Right. While he is the only one we know who has died from direct contact, there has been loss of life, pretty significant loss of life somewhere else.
This has been on the news. It just came out. The CIA has declassified this alien revenge account, and Josh Peck on his podcast, he actually put it up. This happened back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was a routine military exercise in Siberia for the Russian military. And while they were up there doing this exercise, what happened?
Well, there was a UFO that was hovering low, and they said there was an eerie silence, which that's been reported multiple times.
And it was saucer type shaped, and it had a red light around it that was glowing. And
which is interesting because that other family saw the one with the red light. Either on orders or because that's just what they were trained to do, they launched a surface-to-air missile and hit the craft, causing it to crash. But upon closer examination, the wreckage was not of this world, but 5 beings, is what they described it as, emerged from that.
They said the same thing as everybody else. They were short, they were oversized heads, the big eyes. The soldiers who watched them performed a very odd act, they said, because there was 5 of them. They moved together and made a circle, and as they hooked together, there was this glowing sphere of like light and energy that came, and it just continued. This orb finally erupted in an explosion. This is where it gets really weird.
So 23 of the 25 soldiers were turned to stone. 2 were shielded. And then after that, the report says that the beings in the craft were just swept away. Turned to stone. You want to talk about biblical?
Oh, that's why to salt. They took them in and they had their, new of them now, analyzed. And they said their complete molecular structure had changed from that of flesh to stone. They didn't say it was salt. They didn't say it was brimstone. They didn't say it was... This reminds me of the Chronicles of Narnia, which... There's a lot of things in stories and books that you read, fiction and that kind of stuff, or magical arts where they're able to change the elements. But with each one of them, whatever comes out is not from this earth. It's not on our periodic table.
Right.
It's not of our material. It's not of our rock even.
It's not from around here.
No.
And you know, the report labeled this a chilling retaliation, but it brings to mind the question, so what else are they hiding? What are they keeping from us?
And why are they just now letting this out? This is where I would come back. There's a lot of stuff that we're presenting you today, and we have done so much digging. We have done so much research. When I say hours and hours and hours, you have no idea how many hours we put into this. And trying to bring all that, these are fascinating things, but what is the end game? That's what I want to know.
Right.
For years and years and years, it's always, it didn't happen. Didn't happen. So there's nothing to even ask. There's nothing
to see here.
There can't be conspiracy theory if it didn't happen.
Right.
What happened? And now all of a sudden, not only has it happened, but we're now releasing all this documentation. That was from Russia. And
Right.
Russia's finally releasing these things as well. We're going to get in a little later to some really unnerving things in a way that, as we talked about at the beginning, what if there were a global network and effort, inner workings that have been dealing with this the whole time? I want to go back to Brazil because it's exactly what happened when that creature, whatever happened to, we only know of the one that was then dead. There was several
that had been seen.
We don't know what happened to the ones that were alive. They said that the one did die, but we don't know that it did. What about the other ones that died? But anyway, the U.S. military immediately showed up. They flew in on a plane. They showed a metal box.
Well, and it was interesting because they said they landed at a Brazilian Air Force base without authorization. They just came in.
Just showed up.
And they took some kind of metal box and then flew away with it.
They said that the Brazilian military was not equipped or able to handle this.
Right.
But if there were 5 of them, this is what I don't get. Where that saucer first hit, or it wasn't a saucer, they said that minibus. What he saw, they happened out in the middle of the country.
Right.
I don't know how those things would have gotten in town unless there was something else, because they saw a saucer, they didn't see a minibus.
Right.
So that meant there was 2 things. And the ones that landed in the country there, they weren't alive, I don't think. I think they were dead or they were dying, one of the 2.
I don't remember.
I think that's why he was so sad. But then we have the ones inside, in town.
That were injured, but
2 of them were injured. And only one box was taken, and it was a small box that would have fit one of those. What happened to all the other ones? What happened to the spacecraft? What happened to the parts and pieces? It was immediately cleaned up by Brazil.
Or was it? Did they have some help? The other part that we didn't touch on was the fact that they did take them to a hospital. So there were some doctors and nurses who had seen it and observed it. Now, it was already dead at that point in time. But I mean, there were some eyewitnesses of ones who saw these creatures.
Well, and they would have touched it. Now, they would have had on gloves, but still, I mean, you're in
close
contact.
proximity.
So if it was a virus that could be communicable, I mean, like airborne or whatever, they would have got it. They didn't.
Right.
It was only
that physical.
And if it is a skin suit, then it wouldn't have been the alien. It would have been the
Whatever it was
they
made
were
of.
wearing. Did say that the gloves.
Yeah, they had suction cups on it or something.
But they called them gloves. They did talk about the fingers and all these things that we listened to. The saucers made no noise.
Yes, there was like a frequency, but it was almost like a hush. It almost took away the noise, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
And the fingers were like 3 and long.
3 or 4.
Really, really long. And same way with the feet. Okay, you're going to have to excuse us because we're going to have to bring up some notes because we weren't able to get all this up on the screen for slides by any means. But there was a gentleman by the name of Philip J. Corso. This man was unbelievable to watch. He was very young. He was in the military when he started out, and he worked his way up in the ranks really high.
I mean, I think he had like 8 security clearances. He was in the top echelon of military and then civilian contractors and just all of it.
And the no.
And yes, and worked at the Pentagon. I mean, this guy was in everything.
When they finally interviewed him, and it was off the record, really, he also, though, then was writing a book, which then did come out. So this this was back in the 90s, right?
96.
96, when they did the interview. And he was already, I would have said, in his late 70s, 80s almost back then. So he's long been gone. But that man was sharp as a tack. He remembered everything. He remembered every person. He remembered their rank and serial number. He knew what, if they were a general, a major, whatever. And he knew what division, like you said. He had clearance to 8 different top security plus additional ones. And he knew every single one. And we want to bring to you some of his accounts of what he talked about. When he was a meticulous note taker also. I mean, he had a lot of this stuff, copies of things or documents, just all kinds of things. It wasn't all, I mean, he remembered, I remember I wrote that over. And he knew where to find everything. And he had drawn pictures, he had maps, he had everything. And he talks about several of the encounters that he had. He knew about Roswell. He knew about St. Augustine. He knew about, did he know about Brazil? It wouldn't have surprised me if he did.
I don't know that he said anything about it, although it was recorded the same year that happened.
And so they were asking him about these different things because he's, far late after that. What are they going to do to him when he's in his 80s?
Right.
And I think he just really wanted to get this information out there. He recounted a story of when they had sent him out into the desert. It was White Sands Desert. They gave him exact coordinates of where he was supposed to meet this thing. Now, this was not the first extraterrestrial ship, so we say, or whatever, that he had been involved with, I don't think. They sent him out there with coordinates, and he took one of their, I can't think of what he called it, but Land Rover vehicles type thing that could go through all that sand. And he gets all the way out there, and he's at the coordinate, and there's nothing there. And he's like,
oh, because there had been a report of something odd.
And he's like, this is crazy. Why am I out here? And he waited for a while, and then he was just about ready to leave, and all of a sudden he saw a ship materialize, a saucer. Yeah. And he thought, I'm out in the middle of the desert. I'm losing it. I'm hallucinating. That's got to be a mirage or something. And so he just waited, and then it disappeared again. And he goes, okay, I must be hallucinating. And then it reappeared again. And he's still struggling with this. So he gets out of this vehicle because it disappeared again, and he went over and he took
a couple of rocks.
Yeah, a couple of rocks and sagebrush, and he put it under where this thing would have appeared. And he waited, and it reappeared again. And when it disappeared, the rocks were completely crushed, and so was the sagebrush. So he knew it was.
There was something to it of substance.
So he went up to it.
Waited.
Put his hand on it. Now he was talking about how hot it was in the desert. He said it was so hot in his vehicle you couldn't even touch the steering wheel.
Right.
And this thing was cool to the touch. In fact, very cool. That was, I think, for him, that was one of the hardest things for him to wrap his mind around, was how cool it was.
And then it was like all of a sudden he kind of realized, wait a minute, something is not right here. Something is not good. So he went back and got in his vehicle and slammed it in reverse, and then it died.
It died.
Interestingly enough, though, so after he'd gotten in the car and backed up and it died, he said there was a vibration or something that happened, that something opened in the sky and it disappeared through it. It kind of went sideways and disappeared through it. Perhaps a portal or a Stargate, for instance.
Probably, but
perhaps with
another dimension.
Yes.
Is right. Well, there was also another instance, also in White Sands in the desert, and this particular one is where he actually says that he encountered an alien, and he drew pictures and pictures of this thing. Okay. When he saw it, what he noted, because he was observing everything, the skin was what?
Scaly. Very scaly, reptilian, he even said.
And this thing had a message for not just him, but for supposedly all of us. And the message was,
we could have a new world if we can take it.
And he didn't know what that meant. If we can
handle
take it back, if we can handle it, if we can, and this thing just disappeared.
Right.
So he never did figure out, and when he went back and his superior said, so what did he say? And he says, we could have a new world if we can take it
Well, and that was the interesting part too, because he called back and wanted them to keep the radar off, and apparently they did not. And their radar detected an object moving 3,000 miles per hour just shortly after he reported seeing that.
We hear that a lot, that there is radar to confirm, or there's different technology things that they've had that have verified that's what's happened has actually happened, whether or not the government says it never happened or not.
Well, it was interesting because the one in White Sands, where he saw the thing appear and disappear, both like our radar and in Holland it was detected. So it wasn't even just Americans who saw that one. But he had a lot of information about different alien encounters and their bodies and whatnot. I thought the part about the extra piece they had on their eyes was very interesting.
There was an extra eyelid. But he thought, for my first thought was, well, like a camel,
or
in
a
the
cat,
desert, or something. They conjectured that other eyelid was for like infrared.
Like a night vision.
He also got a hold of the reports while he was in all this. They came from Walter Reed and it was Roswell, wasn't it?
I think it was
the
the
alien that they
autopsies.
did the autopsy and they looked at. What he was just so flabbergasted about was there was no lymphatic system. There was no digestive system.
Right.
And the reproductive system, while it was there, it was so atrophied that
it was clearly not in use.
No, it was pointless in a sense. What was actually said in this report was that it appeared to be a clone. I'm like, what would it be a clone of? And what did they have before to know that this was a clone of that? Now we know that that even I will say that Hitler was doing cloning way back when.
Right.
And so if we brought over the 51
scientists
and put them in Area 51, that they would have continued that cloning technology.
Right.
How do we know how to do all this cloning? But I just think it's very thought-provoking that they were able to tell back then, in 1947, that this was a clone, because that was autopsy. He kept linking this and these alien encounters to the Sumerians. Nobody else talks about, unless you're in the circle that we're kind of in, and you're coming at it from a religious standpoint, and you're looking at, okay, how does this fit in with God and
a biblical
fallen
perspective,
realm,
right.
and a biblical perspective, and that always kind of leads you back to the Sumerians and their gods, Enlil and Enki and stuff like that. He is the first guy that we have heard out on another complete different front. And he was really trying to get that out. He kept saying, nobody's checking out the Sumerians. Nobody's looking at the Sumerians. They just vanished. I think this has to do with the Sumerians. It was just funny how adamant he was, and that was something he really, really wanted to get out. He didn't expand a lot of it on there. It was like he wanted to say a lot more, but he kind of held it back. Maybe it's in his book. I don't know.
Right.
We didn't get his book yet. We didn't have enough time to do that.
No. It was fascinating because we talked about how precise the cutting is when we talked about the cattle mutilations, but he took it even further and said that they could see that they didn't even cut through a cell.
It's just like,
let your brain wrap around that kind of precise. They did not even damage one cell.
We don't have that kind of technology. There's no way we could do something like that.
Not even a little bit.
As he continued to talk, he talked about the technology that is so much different. And he was going back to that first one that I mentioned with the ship that was cloaking, I would say, was there and out and was there and out. And when he was talking to his superiors, they said it was a magnetic propulsion. We've heard that from other people too. In fact, we have so many scientists right now that are working on this new propulsion system. It's unbelievable, and it's fascinating. The more people you watch, how they're coming at it from different ways. Even Einstein, trying to figure out a way, how can we go higher, faster, quicker, with less energy?
Right.
So this is where I got all charged up. Because when he went back and he was reciting everything that had happened and what he'd seen and what he felt and what he did. And it must have been, I don't know what clued him in. Again, this obviously was not the first time, because his superiors told him that actually what he had encountered was a time machine. And what it did to his truck and the back and forth, it was actually it was out of sync. Recalibrating and getting the time back. Okay, we have said all along that Hollywood has to tell you a little bit of truth in everything they do.
Well, or they use Hollywood. There is something that they either use Hollywood or there are people involved in Hollywood that are in on things. But what we hear from Hollywood that then comes out in real life, it's happened way too many times to be a coincidence.
And it is in a cyclical thing. Mm-hmm. Like, you see that. It was like Aliens, and then it was, I don't remember, something else, and then it was all about superheroes. And then it circled to time machines.
Well, and this whole concept of a Lazarus effect or the Mandela effect is very similar, which is right along with time travel.
We've talked about that in great depth for a lot, and this just more and more that we're running into that is now coming out. Literally, last night, so many headlines and stuff that has just come out on the news. It was on your regular news stations.
Right.
It'll blow your mind. We're going to get to that later. But anyway, so this was the first time that something was mentioned in 1996 about a time machine.
And so we talked about that last summer, I think it was, because the Indiana Jones movie that came out had a time machine. And then there was 2 or 3 other movies that were out or TV shows that talked about it.
I mean, it was just all about time travel. Some of Marvel and yes.
Mm-hmm. So it was out there.
So he's part of the R&D, the research and development, and in the Air Defense to National Guard. And he was stationed right there in D.C. He was defending that area, which put him then into the Pentagon. And from there, this man just kept working his way up, and he ended up in Trudeau's office. They're the ones that wanted him because of his specialties. And his job was to just watch things
and kind of pay attention.
And they said, and don't understand it. We want you just to watch it and not try to understand it. So they gave him, his job was what? So his job was that the government would give him material that didn't exist, and they would bring in companies outside sectors. So we're talking IBM, Westinghouse, GE,
a whole list of companies that they had given this technology to, and didn't tell him where it came from. He said they probably assumed it came from Russia or the Cold War.
The whole thing was don't ask, don't tell.
Right.
Because here was the caveat: we're going to give you this material. Don't tell anyone where you got it. You go reverse engineer it, figure it out, then you can patent your own thing and make all the money on it.
Right.
And so it was a win-win. So no, they're not going to tell anyone where they got it from, because then that would take the glamour out of it for them.
Mm-hmm. So and that's where that compartmentalization came in also, because they didn't give it all to one company. Different companies got different parts of it, and so no one knew.
Well, he said they were from Westinghouse, GE, North American, Rockwell, Bell, TRC, and IBM. So, I mean, those were just some of the names that he threw out there. He also said the 3 things that we got for sure. Now, you have to realize this was back in the 90s. In the 90s.
That he released this information. A lot of it happened much earlier than that.
So the first thing was the circuit board. Mm-hmm. The second thing was lasers. Mm-hmm. And the third thing was fiber optics. When did we finally see fiber optics?
In
2020 almost or something. I mean, it was
it took a long time to get through.
So he's talking about this stuff before we even knew what this stuff was. It wasn't even on anybody's radar.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it might have been in science circles or in technology circles, but certainly not the general public by any stretch. In 1959, he was put in charge, Phil was put in charge of all the university heads, laboratories, that kind of thing. And when they would send information to them to have them analyze things, they were told not to keep any copies. There was not to be any record of this stuff.
No, it just couldn't be traced.
Right.
That was a whole compartmentalized, you send it out to a whole bunch of different people, and nobody really knows what they're looking at. They don't know where it came from. They don't know where it's going, what it's going to be used for. He even talks about the links to what was going on with Russia. and it was a Russian base, a CIA system, that could localize all the atomic activity. But their 200 scientists, something went wrong, and they were all killed in an atomic explosion. We didn't hear about this. But what was noted was there was UFO activity in the area before the explosion and before all these 200 men were killed.
Right.
Kind of goes back to what we talked about in Antarctica and all this stuff where they said that
we were getting too far
too
along.
close, and every time that they would stop it, and then every time there was a nuclear shutdown or something to do with the nuclear, there had been a whole bunch of UFO sightings beforehand. I think the whole thing, though, was still a ploy. I think, well, because the fallen realm, again, if you're coming at it from our standpoint, they have given us information we should not have had, but then they take it back. You're not quite ready for it. And then they'll dole it out a little bit. Well, and then they take it back. Well, you're not quite ready. Then they'll dole it out. All of this is to say that they keep telling us that there are creators.
Right.
That's where this is really going at. If they are our gods, our creators, then that's why they're keeping us from self-destruction. It's a game that they've been playing
for a very
this
long
whole
time.
He continued to talk. I mean, his whole list of credentials is just off the charts. And they went back through and they double-checked all this, and everything that he said was true. I mean, I'm not going to get into all the logistics, but I mean, we have it written down what this man has meddled with. But he talked about that there is laser beam technology that they are still trying to figure out. And here's the thing. This is during the Cold War. Russia, this will make your hair almost stand up on it. Russia and the U.S. were not only just fighting for the same technology, they were working together. They had scientists. So, okay, we'll say like the governments were fighting each other during the Cold War. But we had all these scientists that were sharing information back and forth between America and Russia, the Soviet Union. And it was all on cold fusion, and it was all on the nuclear stuff. Why would we be sharing information, and why would we be stockpiling all these weapons when, if you're my age or not, you probably remember the 80s, there was a movie, maybe it was 90s, I think it was 80s, that came out that was called War Games. This was back when the nuclear warheads, there was really that big, we were worried that we were going to go to war with Russia, and all somebody had to do was push the button, and that was in, and we're going to end the world. And that particular movie, it was a computer. Kid got on it and didn't realize he was into NASA or the Pentagon, and he starts playing this computer game. He thinks, and he's actually into a military thing, and we're on the verge of World War III. The computer takes over. This is interesting. Even back then, the computer takes over, and he figures out a way to override it so that way it starts playing the game that it thinks it's playing, and it realizes that it can't win. No matter who attacks who first or how much they attack, the whole world blows up, and there is no win. And so it finally says, game over. It stops. That's what was really going on, but I'm wondering, it wasn't that what were we really trying to shoot at? Because there is no point in us going to war with each other because we would blow up the world. But why would Russia need the nukes? Why would we need the nukes? Why would other people need the nukes unless they were trying to shoot at something else? It seems counterintuitive if we're in a Cold War and we're working together with our enemy.
Unless that was all a ploy.
Exactly. And if you look at it from what we've talked about, what is the end game on this? It's the one world government that's eventually coming down the pike, and that's been the push all along.
Right.
Who can ever come up with the technology? If we have to work together, we'll do that, because in the end, that's going to be the common goal.
Right.
He also talked about that compartmentalization that we did, where they would, so instead of giving it to the companies, or even if you were at a company, the government would pull people out of different, let's say different scientists or different physicists or different engineers, and somebody was like highly known in the field, they would just grab them, bring them in, not tell them anything, give them something, and tell them you have to do this or figure it out or whatever, and then bam, they were done. They didn't even know what they worked on. They don't know if they ever finished it. And a lot of times they would just do parts of it.
Right.
And so they never saw the whole, it was like the Manhattan Project. They keep talking about that. It was little bitty parts. They had no clue what they were actually creating.
Right.
I always wondered if they even did it right or, you know, if it worked or anything like that. That would be unnerving.
It would be.
The exciting thing with Mr. Corso was he was the first guy that had that much knowledge from back then, that was still alive, that was in the know, and is now, you know, was able to talk about it. He's far enough out, and you would think that that wouldn't matter. It's interesting why they would just let people start talking about things and getting information out there, but that was in the 90s, and nothing really, I mean, now we're just starting to really hear about
some of that kind of stuff. I know we've given you a lot of information and there is so much more to go. So for time constraints, we're gonna have to stop for today and know that we are gonna pick this up next time. So what you choose to do with this information is up to you, but you can't say, we didn't tell you. Until next time, live long and prosper.